is being served.
जी, और सीधी जो तस्वीरें हम अभी तक देख रहे थे यशोभूमि से, हमारे साथ में दो खास मेहमान जुड़े हुए हैं। स्टूडियो में हमारे साथ में जेके त्रिपाठी, डॉक्टर चारू हैं, और हमारे साथ में ऑनलाइन जयंतो दास गुप्ता जुड़े हुए हैं। हम आगे बढ़ते हैं। एक बहुत अच्छी एक बातचीत जो है वो ज़रूर यहाँ पर हो रही होगी। प्रोटोकॉल के तहत ये सारी मुलाकात होती है। जेके त्रिपाठी, मैं आपका टेक इस पर लेना चाहूँगी।
मुलाकातें जो होती हैं वो फोटो ऑप्स तो होती है, उसके साथ ही साथ डिग्नेटरीज आपस में कुछ ऐसी भी बातें करते हैं जिससे ऐसा सूत्र मिलता है जिससे आगे बढ़ा जा सके जिन मामलों पे डिस्कशन हुआ, और यही चीज़ लंच के दौरान भी होती है। तो ये दिखने में तो सिर्फ ये होता है कि सिर्फ ये फ़ोटो ऑप्स है, लेकिन इसमें थोड़े से और भी निहितार्थ आ जाते हैं जो आगे के लिए सहायक होते हैं।
बधाइयाँ भी दी जाती होंगी।
जी,
भारत ने G20 के दौरान जो किया, या फिर P20 में जिस तरीके से हमने बढ़ चढ़ कर, या फिर हमने जिस तरीके से इसका संचालन किया है, उसके बारे में भी चर्चा हो रही होगी। डॉक्टर चारू, निश्चित तौर से, और खाने के मेन्यू पे मुझे लगता है कि अब तो खाने के टेबल पर जो सारे मेहमान हैं वो हैं, तो निश्चित तौर से जो हमारी जो थीम है मिलेट्स पे, उस पर भी चर्चा हो रही होगी और उनको अहमियत बताई जा रही होगी कि क्यों हमने इसको आज खाने में शामिल किया गया है। हम बस बैठकर मतलब बात कर सकते हैं, सोच सकते हैं इस बारे में। जी,
मिलेट्स को लेके आप मेरी तरफ देख रहे हैं। मैं सिर्फ ये कह सकती हूँ कि मिलेट्स खाने में स्वाद या हेल्थ के लिए यूज़फुल नहीं है। हम लोग IAPA में, मैं एक इंस्टीट्यूट से हूँ, इंडियन इंस्टीट्यूट ऑफ पब्लिक एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन, हम लोग मिलेट्स पे एक एमफिल डिसर्टेशन कर रहे हैं कि मिलेट्स रागी फार्मर्स को गुमला डिस्ट्रिक्ट में मिलेट ग्रोइंग से क्या फ़ायदा हुआ और क्या इकोनॉमिक ग्रोथ में मदद मिल रही है। तो मिलेट्स अपने आप में हम सिर्फ अपनी प्लेट पे ना देखें, बट पीछे भी देखें कि वो पूरी वैल्यू चेन को कैसे हेल्प कर रहा है, और जिसमें हमारा इंस्टीट्यूट IAPA बहुत सॉलिड रिसर्च कर रहा है।
Okay, let me bring in Ambassador as well. He joins us virtually. Good afternoon, Ambassador. The fact that at the time that we are discussing all of these, there's a grand lunch spread out there at Yashobhumi for the delegates who are attending, and it's sort of a concluding event. It said a lot can happen over coffee, but a lot can also happen over working lunches. How do you see events like these strengthening diplomacy? Because whatever success we are seeing today, India having attained at G20, at P20, diplomacy has been the backbone.
Absolutely right. I think in formal negotiations or meetings, a little bit is, takes place during the formal meetings, but a large amount of actual interaction, exchange of frank views, and interpersonal relationship building, that takes place off the table. And a lunch or a dinner or an informal gathering is the best place to take it forward. So people normally in formal meetings would prepare from, would speak from prepared texts, but in the informal setting, they would exchange their views and they would be much more forthcoming and clearer in their enunciation. So this is the time and the way to build up relationships, because if we have to move together, if all the parliamentarians are to contribute to a successful implementation of the G20 resolutions, it is important to build up personal relationships. And I think this is an excellent setting, and the arrangements have been very, very good in that respect. Everybody has lauded the extra care for detail that has gone into the preparations, not only for the G20, but the P20 as well.
You're right. Ambassador Tripathi, the fact that a lot of what Ambassador Das Gupta was saying, it's been hailed by the dignitaries who are here in India. They were there at the Parliament building yesterday, and they were taken around the new Parliament building. Today also, we spoke to a lot of these delegates, and they appreciated India for this highly successful G20 and P20 summit. Now, as we near the fag end of both these summits, of course, India will hold a virtual summit in November. But of these two physical summits that have taken place in September and October, what has been the biggest takeaway for you?
Well, I will give you the perspective one by one. The first one, that is G20. G20, the biggest success was the conference itself and its joint declaration. And then beside showing, beside the optics or showing its prowess, India to other countries through Jan Bhagidari program, India has also achieved quite lot. Like India has been able to bring in the AU, African Union, a bloc of 55 countries. India had been able to initiate the biofuel initiative. India had been able to be form a part of IMEE, India Middle East Economic Europe Economic Corridor. So these are the biggest ones, and I am sure that Brazil will not be able to replicate the amount of success that India had shown in G20. Now coming to P20, now all the 4 topics that had been discussed, they were quite relevant and I will say most important in today's world. Women emancipation, this digital economy, and green energy and sustainable development goals. All these are very important, on which a sort of consensus has been developed. And now, as Ambassador Dasgupta was saying, that now the hardcore diplomacy is over on this, and now in a relaxed mode they are interacting. Earlier, you know, earlier diplomats used to be very hard-necked people, stiff-necked people. They will discuss things nitty-gritty and then they will depart. But now the personal chemistry is coming into action gradually. So this is the time when personal chemistry comes in, and don't forget that many of these delegates might try to take reins of their countries, which will in longer run, which will be helpful for each of them.
जी डॉक्टर चारू, आपका क्या कहना है इस पर? क्योंकि देखिए भारत तो शुरू से ही सबकी बात कर रहा है, और G20 में भी हमने किया, और P20 में भी लोकसभा अध्यक्ष की अगर भाषण की मैं बात करूं, उन्होंने जो अपने विचार रखे, सबको साथ लेकर चलना है।
मुझे लगता है इस टाइम भारत ने सबको बहुत ही अहम तरीके से ये क्लियर कर दिया है कि वासुदेव कुटुंबकम पॉसिबल है, और महाकुंभ ऑफ ऑल समिट्स था ये। मतलब अपने प्रधानमंत्री जी को मद्देनज़र रख के और उनको लिबरली कोट करते हुए मैं कह सकती हूँ कि इस महाकुंभ में इंडिया ने जो हासिल किया है, या इंडिया के थ्रू बाकी नेशंस जो हासिल करेंगे, वो अपने आप में बहुत एग्जाम्पलरी है। और मेरा ये भी मानना है कि अब धीरे धीरे हम लोग इस बात को समझ रहे हैं कि ये सारा कुछ तभी संभव है अगर हम सेंटर में सिटीज़न को, या ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच कह लीजिए, उसको रखें, और राइट्स बेस्ड और जस्ट डिजिटल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन, इंक्लूसिव डिजिटल ट्रांसफॉर्मेशन, अब इंडिया ही लीड ले सकता है इसको हासिल करने में।
So, you know, as we speak, and I know, Dr. Charu, you have to go, but women-led development is something that I would like your response on. It's been one of the key priorities. There were 6 priorities that India laid out ahead of its G20 presidency, and women-led development came out as a very unique concept, because all this while we've been talking about how to empower women, how to ensure that women are beneficiaries of several schemes, but now we are talking of women as equal leaders, as equal participants in this growth. Vision 2047, the next 25 years, we would like women to take charge, to be the drivers of the change we want to see.
I think a proof to the pudding is this dice itself. I mean, the fact that we are talking about G20 and B20 with due regards to ambassadors, offline and online both, we are actually able to prove to the world that women was always a leader who chose to be in the background. So development was happening because of women, either implicitly or explicitly. But now the joy is that these both components, Shiv and Shakti, Yan and Yin, are coming together in forefront also. So India has always, I don't know why we say India has always been a country to look up to in terms of women leaders. It's other countries, even developed countries, who need to take a cue from us, right from Rani Jhansi to all other women leaders at present, include yes. And now, please look at our own. Yes, look at our own president. I'm so impressed, and I think women-led development brings to the table a possibility of kindness economy.
Right.
कि nurturing ability जो एक inherent attribute है, वो अब जब leaders में आएगा, जब वो women leaders हैं, will probably create a more peaceful earth.
Ambassador Dasgupta, do you think after these summits, now the G20 will pick up the baton of women-led development, and we'll see Brazil building on what India has, initiated?
Yes, I think that these parliamentarians who have met here in Delhi, and before that the heads of state in the G20 meeting, they would all be taking this message to sensitize their own people, their legislators, and their executive to implement in spirit and letter the resolutions of both the G20 as well as the P20. But one thing needs to be borne in mind all the while, that it is the domestic, of course, we all have to take it forward together, collectively, as one earth, one family. But individual nations have to take the initiative to take effective steps to implement all these resolutions. And then only, and if they require some assistance or technical knowledge, for instance, in the case of the climate change areas, there would be a need for transfer of technology, for climate financing, for a lot of other things. But as far as women-led development is concerned, this is something which the nation has to itself decide its movement forward and its course of action. And I think in that direction, India has taken a very significant step in terms of getting the Act, Women's Reservation Act, enacted last month.
मेरा सवाल आपसे है, अभी अगर मैं सत्र के इस आखिरी चरण की बात करूं, हमने जो तस्वीरें देखी, अब देखिए सहमति बन चुकी है सारे देशों की। मुझे आप समझा सकते हैं कि इसके बाद का पूरा प्रोसेस क्या होता है, क्योंकि लोकसभा अध्यक्ष ने भी अपनी बात कही कि अब बाकी जो देश हैं वो अपनी संसद में जा करके इस मैसेज को वो देंगे और उस पर काम करने की कोशिश करेंगे। लेकिन सवाल ये है कि क्या पूरा प्रोटोकॉल क्या होता है, इसकी जो मॉनिटरिंग है वो कैसे होती है, वो अगर आप हमें समझा सकें।
ये प्रश्न मेरे से पूछा गया?
जी बिल्कुल बिल्कुल,
माफ कीजिएगा।
जयंतो जी, ये सवाल आपसे ही है, मेरा सवाल आपसे है कि मॉनिटरिंग कैसे होती है। देखिए अब बातचीत हो चुकी है, सहमति बन चुकी है, आफ्टर P20 कैसे मॉनिटर किया जाता है इसे, कि कौन से देश ने कितनी प्रोग्रेस की है, जो प्लानिंग हुई है उस पर कितनी बातचीत आगे बढ़ी है, इसके बाद का पूरा प्रोसेस अगर आप हमें समझा सके सर। जी
देखिए, हर कोई अंतर्राष्ट्रीय समझौता या करार जो होता है उसमें एक सेक्रेटेरिएट कहीं ना कहीं मंत्रालयों में, किसी मंत्रालय में वो स्थापित होता है। तो हमारे यहाँ भी G20 मंत्रालय है के लिए फाइनेंस ट्रैक जो है वो वित्त मंत्रालय की ओर से उसकी फॉलो अप एक्शन उसमें ली जाती है। और जो शेरपा ट्रैक है, वो शेरपा अगर गवर्नमेंट से बाहर है, जैसे अभी के जो शेरपा हैं वो कोई मंत्री नहीं है, तो उनके लिए अलग से सेक्रेटेरिएट का गठन किया गया होगा। अब ये जो G20 रेजोल्यूशन आए, जो 83 पैराग्राफ्स का रेजोल्यूशन आया, और P20, इन सब को अलग अलग मंत्रालयों के बीच बांट दिया जाएगा, जिसमें कार्रवाई अपेक्षित है विभिन्न मंत्रालयों की ओर से। कुछ मामले में राज्य सरकारों को भी इसमें शामिल करना पड़ेगा, क्योंकि उनका भी दायित्व बनता है। और उसके बाद ये फॉलो अप करना इंडिविजुअल जो मिनिस्ट्रीज हैं उनका दायित्व बन जाता है, और G20 सेक्रेटेरिएट उसमें कोऑर्डिनेट करेगा, समन्वय स्थापित करेगा, वो आंकड़े इकट्ठे करेगा, देखेगा कि किस तरह से ये हम लागू कर रहे हैं, जो प्रस्ताव जो स्वीकृत हुए हैं G20 की बैठक में।
J.K. त्रिपाठी, आप कुछ ऐड ऑन करना चाहेंगे हमारे व्यूवर्स के लिए? आगे की का जो पूरा प्रोसेस होता है वो क्या होता है?
मैं बिल्कुल पूरी तरह से सहमत हूँ एम्बेसडर दासगुप्ता से। इसमें क्या होता है, चूंकि P20 G20 के ही प्रोसेस का एक हिस्सा है जो कि बाद में डेवलप हुआ है, तो अब इसमें जैसा कि उन्होंने बताया कि विभिन्न मंत्रालयों में बांट दिए जाएंगे, प्लस जो G20 देश हैं, अब तो G21 है, G21 जो है उसमें क्या होगा कि विभिन्न स्तरों पर वर्किंग ग्रुप्स बनते हैं जिनकी समय समय पर मीटिंग होती है और समीक्षा होती है, फिजिकल मोड में वर्किंग ग्रुप की मीटिंग की, वर्चुअल मोड में, और विद एक्सचेंज ऑफ डॉक्यूमेंट्स। तो समय समय पे समीक्षा होती कि क्या किया जा रहा है, कहाँ तक पहुँचे, कहाँ तक और पहुँचना है, और उस सबका जो है अंत जो होता है आखिर में जब G20 होती है तो उसके साथ ही एक और ग्रुप की मीटिंग होती है, उसमें फाइनल किया जाता है। जैसे कि एम्बेसडर दासगुप्ता ने बताया, शेरपाज होते हैं, फाइनेंस मिनिस्ट्रीज होती हैं, NGOs होते हैं, तो सब मिला करके सबका कोलेट किया जाता है, सबकी इंफॉर्मेशन और मॉनिटरिंग इस तरह से की जाती है।
You know, since Ambassador Das Gupta, since the G20 declaration is non-binding, we understand the fact that it is upon the P20 to understand what the commitments have been made at the G20 level, go back to their parliaments and then frame policies accordingly is something that is expected. It's a continuous process, of course, which keeps passing on from one presidency to the other. But what we would like to understand from you, all of these members of the G20 have different legislative landscapes. They are extremely diverse. Is there need to empower parliaments to enable them to fast-track implementation of these policies so that the kind of change, the transformation that we talk about happens at a much faster pace?
I think one of the most important things in this context would be the primacy that they attribute or they give to the G20 resolutions on different subjects.
Right.
They may also have other pressing problems, because some of the G20 resolution items have not been quantified as such. They are hortatory in nature, that this is something which is an aspirational objective. We should all strive to achieve these. But these will have to be broken down in terms of concrete targets, quantification. And that is where I think each country will have to take its own decision, because resources are limited and there may be competing demands. So if a country decides, for instance, in the P20, it has been emphasized meeting, two things have been emphasized specifically, and one of them is about universal literacy, which is also an SDG goal, one of the 17 goals. Universal health coverage is another one. Food security has also been a prominent item on the agenda of the SDG. Now, all these things, to what extent they would be, remove hunger, remove poverty. But if you quantify and then you find out how much resources you have for, let's say, the next year, next 5 years, etc., then you plan accordingly. So there are aspirational objectives. There are things which can be done by just taking a decision and implementing, which will not require much of resources. But where the problem comes is because of the resource constraint.
You're right, and this is where, Ambassador Tripathi, the concept of shared best practices perhaps will come in. So where India says we've seen a success story, say, in the digital arena through the kind of digital transformation that we've had, and we would like it to share the technology, we would like to bridge the digital divide in the global south so that everyone can grow together, everyone can prosper together. What do we mean? How do we share these best practices?
Well, you see, we share our best practices at different levels. At the levels of working groups, at the levels of our parliaments, at the levels of head of states, at the level of expert groups, as well at the level of the different ministries. And irrespective of whether a country is parliamentary democracy or presidential democracy or republic or union or not democracy at all, as few might be.
Yes.
I wouldn't like to name. Not a democracy at all. But even then, irrespective of that, since G20 is the bigger framework, and it involves heads of states of the countries, of the members. So, even if a country's parliament, a particular country's parliament is fully subservient to the head of state, it will have to report to the head of state, and head of state being member of the G20 summit at summit level, he will decide accordingly. So, this sharing will not be any problem for any of the member countries.
सर एक सवाल यहाँ पर मैं ऐड ऑन ये करना चाहूँगी आपसे कि क्या भारत की जिम्मेदारी और साथ ही साथ अब ब्राज़ील जो कि नेक्स्ट जो G20 की जो प्रेसिडेंसी है वो ब्राज़ील के पास में है, तो क्या भारत के साथ साथ ब्राज़ील की जिम्मेदारी भी सबसे ज़्यादा बढ़ जाती है क्योंकि ये एक फॉलो अप होता है? कैसे जो एक कोऑर्डिनेशन होता है ये क्या दोनों कंट्री आपस में बनाने की कोशिश करेंगे और हर मौके पर एक फॉलो अप होता रहेगा दोनों देशों के बीच में? ये समझना
देखिए, सिर्फ दो देशों के बीच में नहीं होता, ये इसको कहते हैं ट्राइका
जी,
ट्राइका, जिसमें कि भूतपूर्व अध्यक्ष, वर्तमान अध्यक्ष और भावी अध्यक्ष। तो अब इसमें अभी तक तो इंडोनेशिया था, अब इसमें भारत, ब्राजील और चीन, इनके बीच में हर स्तर पे कोऑर्डिनेशन, हर स्तर पे डिस्कशन, हर स्तर पे विचार विमर्श होता रहेगा ताकि कंटिन्यूटी बनी रहे।
Okay, Ambassador Dasgupta, one question that I would like to, and because we are talking about the Troika, one thing that's interesting is for 4 years continuously, the presidency of G20 remains with developing countries. How big an advantage it is for the developing economies to set the agenda which suits their needs?
I think we have to view this in perspective. As you have already mentioned, the G20 resolutions are not binding. They depend a lot on the initiatives that individual nations take in different areas. Having said that, it is about sensitizing the whole world, the political leadership as well as the executive, about the challenges that are being faced across the world. And many of those challenges are common shared challenges, common shared problems. And the solutions also are quite well known, though they may be difficult to implement or achieve within a short period of time. So G20 will act as a kind of a forum, and hitherto the Global South did not have an adequate voice in G20. Because if you look at the history of G20, it was a transformation from G7 or G8, which ultimately, became a finance minister's G20 and later on a head of state G20.
लेकिन ये अच्छा मौका रहा है जी जयंतो, ये अच्छा मौका रहा है। देखिए, डेवलपिंग कंट्री एक साथ में और इतने बहुत ही हम कह सकते हैं कि जो अनुभव रहा है वो काफी नजदीक से रहा है, तो इसका भी एक फायदा आपको लग रहा है कि आने वाले भविष्य में मिलेगा इन कंट्रीज को?
कि जो हमारे विकासशील देश हैं या सबसे जो पिछड़े हुए देश हैं, एलडीसीज हैं, उनको एक आवाज उनको मिली है इस माध्यम से। और इसमें बहुत सारे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय संगठन हैं, जैसे WTO है अंतर्राष्ट्रीय व्यापार के लिए, UN है जिसमें बेसिक फंक्शन पीस कीपिंग है, लेकिन UN के कई संगठन हैं जो विकास पर जो ज्यादा केंद्रित हैं, जैसे UNDP है। तो इन सब में जो फैसले होते हैं वो अक्सर, हाँ, पहले की बात अगर करेंगे तो विकसित देशों के द्वारा नेतृत्व किया जाता था और वो कुछ फैसले लिए जाते थे जो बाकी लोग नीरव होकर के ही उसको मान लेते थे। अब ये आवाज उनको मिली है और ये भारत ने बहुत बड़ी इसमें भूमिका उनकी भारत की रही है, टू प्रोवाइड अ वॉइस टू द वॉइसलेस। अफ्रीकन यूनियन जो है उसमें 55 देश हैं, उसमें से सिर्फ साउथ अफ्रीका और सऊदी अरेबिया उसमें शामिल थे। तो अब वो बाकी देशों को सबको एक वॉइस मिली है और ये जो है ये एक बहुत बड़ी उपलब्धि है। और इसका जो असर पड़ेगा वो सिर्फ G20 तक सीमित नहीं रहेगा, वो UNDP में, UN में, WTO में, IMF में, वर्ल्ड बैंक में, हर जगह। चूंकि इसमें G20 में एक रेजोल्यूशन लिया गया है अबाउट रिफॉर्म ऑफ द multilateral development banks. तो स्वाभाविक है कि ये दबाव बनेगा और ये आवाज सुननी पड़ेगी IMF और वर्ल्ड बैंक के भी रिफॉर्म के लिए, जिससे कि ज्यादा से ज्यादा राशि मुहैया की जा सके फॉर डेवलपमेंट असिस्टेंस, फॉर क्लाइमेट फाइनेंसिंग, फॉर डिजास्टर मैनेजमेंट, एक्सेट्रा.
You know, Ambassador, reforms is something that India has been pushing for of these multilateral institutions for decades now. But the fact that all of these existing institutions, or all of these the countries who are in powerful positions at these institutions, they refuse to share the power or authority that they are currently enjoying. Does it threaten that if these reforms do not take place timely, and India being the world's largest democracy is underrepresented, so are other countries like Brazil and Argentina and other countries of the global south, does it threaten the credibility of these institutions? Will it make them redundant in the times to come if the reforms aren't timely?
Well, to my mind, in the case of the IMF and the World Bank, they have a disproportionate shareholding pattern, because the amounts contributed determine the voting shares. And since the developed countries have contributed the most, they have the say, in the final say in matters. Now, if they have to be sensitized that they by themselves can't take decisions on behalf of all the developing countries and the global south, that the voices of the global south has to be heard, and not only heard but respected, and action taken in a nuanced manner which takes into consideration the aspirations, the difficulties, and the opportunities that the global south seeks. So if this does not take place, and I don't think that is a possibility, because every institution, multilateral institution, is in the process of undergoing reforms, undergoing change. In the WTO, for instance, there is constant talk of reforming the WTO to make it more receptive to the requirements of developing countries, the poorer countries. So this is something which will take time, but I think India has put its shoulder to the wheel and given it a huge push through this G20 meeting.
We hope that push continues and the reforms that we want to see happen at the earliest. Thank you, Ambassador, for joining us on the telecast and sharing your views with us. Two more guests are now joining us in the studio. I'm delighted to welcome Mr. Rajiv Nayan, Senior Fellow, Manohar Parikar Institute for Defence and Security Analysis, and Mr. Pathikrit Pine, Senior Research Fellow, SPMRF. Thank you, gentlemen, for joining us on Sansad TV. Mr. Nayan, I beg your pardon. The fact that the P20 summit is now heading towards a closure, there's a working lunch that's happening after the two thematic sessions have ended this morning. Tell us about what's the biggest takeaway for you from the G20 that happened last month and the offshoot, the P20 that concluded.
Like G20, the statement was issued a day before the conclusion of the summit, means the meeting. So it's big takeaway. It's a consensus-based body, and there is always a possibility of surfacing of differences. So what is happening? India has been managing all the differences, all the forces, all the contradictions quite well, and getting a resolution passed. Second issue is that, again, as we have been discussing over 2-3 days, and it was also discussed during the meeting, that whatever we in G20 was adopted should be implemented. So this is an implementation, but this is a decision-making process. Any leader, any bureaucrat will have to look towards its legislative body, which is generally considered to be financial arm of that country. So finance is quite important. So you will get finance from this body. So that's why it is also important. Similarly, now what is happening? If you see the statements issued yesterday, and if you see all the statements made by the different leaders, you will find a continuity. And this continuity is also important because now we are going to consolidate. This is not just merely continuity. It is also consolidation of whatever has been agreed upon. And once you have the idea, blueprint and roadmap, And if roadmap is progressing quite well, so then you can say, yes, this is what the success is. So this is the biggest success.
जी, और इसे भारत के साथ साथ पूरा विश्व भी मान रहा है। पथिकृत, मेरा भी आपसे सेम सवाल है। आपने देखा P20 का पूरा जो समिट है, हमने देखा 4 महत्वपूर्ण जो मुद्दे हैं जिस पर की चर्चा हुई है। आपका मैं इस पर रिएक्शन लेना चाहूँगी। क्लोजिंग रिमार्क भी आपने सुना होगा, क्या कहना चाहेंगे आप?
देखिए मैम, ये जो G20 का एक हिस्सा है P20, तो G20 का जब डिक्लेरेशन आ गया था, जॉइंट डिक्लेरेशन ऑफ कम्युनिके जो आ गया था, उसमें सारे ये चीज़ें इंक्लूडेड थे। तो इसलिए मेरे लिए बहुत ज़्यादा सरप्राइजिंग चीज़ है नहीं कि ये यहाँ पे कंसेंसस से एक जॉइंट डिक्लेरेशन आ गया, बिकॉज इट्स अ कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ द एंटायर प्रोसेस। अब इसके बाद क्या होगा, दैट इज़ अ वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट थिंग। एक चीज़ मैं ये कहना चाहता हूँ, अभी ये पार्लियामेंट्री 20 ख़त्म हो रहा है, इसके बाद इंडिया का प्रेसिडेंसी नवंबर 30 को ख़त्म हो जाएगा। अब देखिए व्हाट इज़ हैपनिंग इन मिडल ईस्ट। मैं एक उदाहरण देना चाहता हूँ। एक चीज़ जो हमेशा भारत ने कहा है अंडर द लीडरशिप ऑफ प्राइम मिनिस्टर मोदी, मल्टीलैटरल इंस्टीट्यूशंस में रिफॉर्म की ज़रूरत है। मल्टीलैटरल इंस्टीट्यूशंस की जो डिस्प्यूट रेजोल्यूशन मैकेनिज्म है उसमें प्रॉब्लम है, डिस्प्यूट्स रिजॉल्व नहीं किया जाता एंड दे टेक द शेप ऑफ ए कॉन्फ्लिक्ट। आज जो मिडिल ईस्ट में हो रहा है, व्हाट इज द रोल ऑफ यूनाइटेड नेशन? कहाँ है यूनाइटेड नेशन? तो आप देखिए जो चीज़ें पिछले 1 साल से जो हम लोग G20 के तहत काम कर रहे थे, बहुत फंडामेंटल प्रॉब्लम्स है जिसके बारे में इंडिया ने पहली बार दे रेज द वॉइस ऑन दिस। फॉर एग्जांपल मेंटल हेल्थ के बारे में कोई बात ही नहीं करता था। फॉर एग्जांपल नोबडी टॉक्ड अबाउट ट्रेडिशनल मेडिसिन, उनके बारे में कोई बात ही नहीं करता था। फ्यूचर ऑफ जॉब्स क्या होगा, आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस आ रहा है, उनका कोई रेगुलेशन नहीं है। आर्टिफिशियल इंटेलिजेंस का जब व्हेन द टाइम कम्स, उस टाइम व्हाट विल बी द शेप ऑफ जॉब्स, क्योंकि वहाँ पे जॉब चैलेंजेस होंगे। तो प्रैक्टिकल बहुत सारे चीज़ लेके पिछले 1 साल में बात हुई, कंसेंसस बनाने की कोशिश की उसके इस कंटिन्यूएशन ऑफ दैट इज व्हाट हैपेंड इन पार्लियामेंट 20। उसमें भी द थिंग्स दैट हैव बीन इंक्लूडेड, जैसे सस्टेनेबल ट्रांजिशन टूवर्ड्स रिन्यूएबल एनर्जी। दिस इज वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट। क्यों? क्योंकि आपका ट्रांजिशन अगर डिसरप्टिव होता है, अचानक हो जाता है, इसका एक इम्पैक्ट पड़ता है समाज के ऊपर, इसका एक इम्पैक्ट पड़ता है इकोनॉमी के ऊपर। यू हैव टू डू द ट्रांजिशन इन अ मैनर जिसमें डेवलपिंग कंट्रीज में इतना इम्पैक्ट ना पड़े। मैं एक चीज कहना चाहता हूं, व्हाट हैज इंडिया डन? द मोस्ट फंडामेंटल थिंग इंडिया हैज डन इज दैट वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज का एक बेंचमार्क होता है, ऐसा होना चाहिए हर चीज में, लेकिन उनके जो पर कैपिटा इनकम है, उनका जो जीडीपी है, यू कैन नॉट कंपेयर दैट विद स्मॉल कंट्रीज। अब यू कैन नॉट एक्सपेक्ट द स्मॉल कंट्रीज टू इन्वेस्ट दैट मच मनी ऑन क्लाइमेट चेंज, ऑन अदर थिंग्स दैट वेस्टर्न कंट्रीज आर डूइंग। इसमें प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने एक सेंटेंस ही यूज्ड कि डिफरेंशिएटेड रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी होना चाहिए। छोटे छोटे देशों को आप उम्मीद नहीं कर सकते जब उनकी अपने प्रायोरिटीज है टू टेक केयर ऑफ पीपल, कंसर्न्स ऑफ पीपल, कि वो क्लाइमेट की बात करें। आज अगर मैं छोटे से प्रैक्टिकल चीज देखिए, आज मिडिल ईस्ट में जो हो रहा है, आप कोई क्लाइमेट के बारे में बात करेगा वहां पे? सो अनलेस multilateral institutions bring peace in the world, unless organizations like WHO takes care so that pandemics don't happen in future, तब जाके लोग क्लाइमेट की बात करेंगे। जब आपकी भूखमरी होगी, जब आप पैंडेमिक्स को रोक नहीं पाएंगे, जब आप लड़ाई को रोक नहीं पाएंगे, तो क्लाइमेट चेंज के बारे में बात कौन करेगा? सो आई थिंक व्हाट इंडिया हैज डन in a very phenomenal way, it has tried to become a bridge between global north and global south. इसकी continuity यहाँ पे है, and there is an acceptance in global north कि इंडिया जो कह रहा है, there is substance in it, and I think the whole credit goes to Prime Minister Modi and his team in negotiating and making the countries understand that benchmark अच्छी चीज है, लेकिन practical problems को भी समझना जरूरी है।
You're right. That different perspective that India brought about through its G20 presidency, talking about inclusive growth, because what we saw after the pandemic and the Russia-Ukraine crisis is that geopolitical crisis took over everything else. So everything took a backbench, and nobody was talking about climate change, about inclusive growth, about giving the voice to the underrepresented countries, that the concept of differentiated responsibility that Mr. Pine spoke about. So we will talk about each of these aspects and what has made India's G20 presidency with another guest who's joining us virtually. Pleasure to welcome former Ambassador Mr. Ashok Sajjanhar. Ambassador, delighted to have you with us on the broadcast. Your views on 2 successful events that have happened within a span of 1 month, the G20, the P20. What has been the biggest achievement for India?
Yes, thank you very much for having me on your show, Tina, and great pleasure as always to be with you. You're very right when you say that, these are two very significant achievements of India. And they have literally come back to back on this platform of the G20. Of course, as we had entered the G20 in early September, I don't think anyone, and possibly that could to an extent also include India, no one really thought that we would be able to come to a consensus declaration at the G20 summit on the 9th and 10th. Because I think the experience before that had not been a very positive one, had not been a very happy one. Starting, of course, from Bali and even before Bali, because before Bali, we were not able to come to any consensus document since there was such a huge rift between the East and the West on the issue of Ukraine, particularly between the United States and all the other Western European countries and Japan, Australia, etc. on one side, and Russia supported by China and one or two other countries on the other side. So we had seen that whether it is the meetings of the development ministers, external affairs ministers, or it is the meetings of the finance minister and central bank governors. So none of them could arrive at a consensus document in before Bali. And even in Bali, I think at the last minute, were we able to get this consensus declaration by use of the formulation that Prime Minister Modi had shared with President Putin in Samarkand on the sidelines of the SCO summit, Shanghai Cooperation Organized Summit in September 22, in which he had said that this is not an era of war. And so we were able to get a consensus in Bali, but soon after that, because Bali happened in the middle of November, and by December, both Russia and China had said that the situation has changed, the circumstances have changed. And so there will be no, they do not accept the language of Bali any longer. And after that, we have seen that even in India, the ministerial meetings that were held, whether it was the foreign affairs meeting in Goa, or it is the finance ministers and central bank governors in Bengaluru. So none of these meetings could arrive at a consensus basically on the issue of the Ukraine conflict. But I think here it was a remarkable success that in G20, on the first day itself, India was able to get a consensus document, New Delhi Leaders Declaration. And that, I think, really brought home the consensus building role that India has played, India continues to play, and bringing all the countries on the same platform. And after that, coming to P20, there have been very substantive discussions, very substantive debates on a large number of important issues. And we have been able to come, this 9th P20 meeting summit has also been able to come to a consensus document, which is again a feather in the cap of India. But coming as this did so soon after the G20 summit, I think it was expected that we'll be able to take it through.
राजीव जी, इसी बात को अगर हम थोड़ा सा आगे बढ़ाएं, जैसा कि अशोक सज्जनहार भी कह रहे थे कि दुनिया के लोग जो हैं, कभी पेरिस के बहाने, कभी बाली के बहाने, कभी गोवा के बहाने मिल रहे हैं, बात कर रहे हैं कि दुनिया की आबो हवा ठीक हो, सारी बातें ठीक हों। लेकिन पथिकृत ने जो एक बड़ी बात अभी कही थी कि ये तब तक थोड़ा मुश्किल लगता है जब तक रूस यूक्रेन जैसी स्थितियां, मिडल ईस्ट जैसी स्थितियां बनी रहेंगी। ऐसे में रास्ता कैसे निकाला जाएगा?
देखिए, रास्ता तो निकल ही रहा है। रूस और यूक्रेन का संघर्ष जारी है। अभी जैसा कि सज्जनहार साहब ने बताया कि उस पिछली बार भी जब बाली में भी दिक्कतें आ रही थी और भारत ने एक बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण भूमिका निभाई थी, एक सर्वसम्मति जगह बनाने में, एक कंसेंसस डॉक्यूमेंट बनाने में, क्योंकि यह सर्वसम्मति पर आधारित यह एक फोरम है, एक मंच है। तो निश्चित ही कर रहे हैं संघर्ष। देखिए, चैलेंजेज है, इसकी स्थापना ही की गई है।
रास्ता निकलता दिख रहा है, रूस यूक्रेन में भी कहाँ दिख रहा है?
देखिए रूस, हमारा जो G20 का एजेंडा रूस और यूक्रेन के बीच युद्ध समाप्त करना नहीं है, लेकिन इस युद्ध से उत्पन्न हुई कोई ऐसी व्याधियाँ, कोई भी बाधाएं, उनको जो पूरे विश्व पटल के, चाहे विश्व जो फाइनेंशियल जो विश्व का अर्थव्यवस्था है या उस पर न असर पड़े, चाहे अगर असर पड़ता भी है तो उसे कैसे कम किया जाए और उसको कैसे आगे बढ़ाया जाए।
मुझे ऐसा लग रहा है कि पाइन शायद ये कहने की कोशिश कर रहे थे कि जैसे ग्लोबल वार्मिंग और ये बहुत बड़ी समस्याएं हैं, लेकिन ये ह्यूमन वार्मिंग जो है, जो आदमी के स्वभाव में जो ताप वृद्धि हो रही है, ये और भी बड़ी समस्या है।
नहीं देखिए ये है इसकी, तो देखिए इसको आप क्षणिक जो कारणों से, चाहे क्षणिक जो सोल्यूशन, जो इमीडिएट सॉल्यूशंस बहुत चीज़ों की नहीं होती। एक बड़ी जो रूस और यूक्रेन की जो समस्या है, बड़ी ही उसकी काफ़ी गहरी जड़ है, उसका काफ़ी जो डीप रूटेड उस प्रॉब्लम जिसे हम कहते हैं वो समस्या है उसकी, और उसके जड़ में जाके अगर जाएंगे तभी जाके हो सकता है ऐसी समस्याओं का समाधान किया जा सके। लेकिन सवाल है कि ठीक है, ऐसी समस्या आती हैं, आती रहेंगी और आती रही हैं पीछे भी। अब इसका किस पर असर रोका जाए? एक है कि शांति के लिए प्रयास किया जाए, दूसरा है समृद्धि के लिए प्रयास किया जाए। इनके बीच ये वातावरण रहेंगे, ये परिप्रेक्ष्य रहेंगे, इस परिप्रेक्ष्य को हम आंख मूंद के नहीं सकते। कोशिश करेंगे कि ऐसी स्थिति न आए, लेकिन ऐसी स्थिति आ गई, उस समय हम कैसे आगे बढ़े, विश्व कल्याण कैसे आगे बढ़े, ये चुनौती है। क्योंकि चुनौतियां तो रहेंगी, आप नहीं समझिए कल को चुनौती समाप्त हो जाएगी, G20 हो या G21 हो जाए, ये चुनौतियां रहेंगी और इस चुनौतियों से हमें अपने अपने विचारों को लाना, और इस संदर्भ में इस तरह के मंच की आवश्यकता है। जैसे आप जिस मंच की शुरुआत जब हुई थी 1999 में, तो उस समय फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस, ग्लोबल फाइनेंशियल क्राइसिस हो रही थी। 2001 आते आते 9/11 हो गया। अब समझिए कि उस समय पूरा परिवर्तन अलग हो गया कि ऐसे स्थिति में किस तरह से स्टेबिलिटी, फाइनेंशियल स्टेबिलिटी लाई जाए। अब आप देखेंगे उस समय के कम्युनिके को अगर आप पढ़ेंगे तो लगेगा कि देखिए उसका अब विश्व भी थोड़ा परेशान ज्यादा हो गया कि अभी एक समस्या से तो मैं जूझ ही रहा था, एक और नई समस्या आ गई।
मैं इसी चीज को थोड़ा सा, इसमें वो बहुत जरूरी हो जाता है। ऐसे ही मैं थोड़ा हल्के अंदाज में उस बात को आपसे जानना चाहता हूँ। जब हम ग्लोबल वार्मिंग की बात करते हैं तो हमें डेटा में बताया जाता है कि इतना बायोमास से ग्लोबल वार्मिंग हो रहा है, इतना ये कारों से हो रहा है, इतना % इससे हो रहा है, वगैरह वगैरह। एक बम के फूटने से कितना होता है, ठीक है, या जहां युद्ध चल रहा है, ठीक है, उसमें कार्बन इमिशन कितना हो रहा है, उसका भी मेजरमेंट जो है वो होना चाहिए।
सर, जिस दिन दुनिया इस हिसाब से देखना शुरू करेगा उस दिन लड़ाई खत्म हो जाएगी। और इसी वजह से प्राइम मिनिस्टर ने हमेशा कहा है कि वसुधैव कुटुंबकम की जो फिलॉसफी है उसको अपनाइए। देखिए राजीव जी ने सही कहा कि यूक्रेन रशिया जो लड़ाई है ना, उसको सॉल्व करने का एजेंडा G20 का नहीं है। लेकिन यूक्रेन रशिया लड़ाई के बाद जो विकसित देश है उन्होंने क्या किया, सैंक्शन लगा दिया। अब सैंक्शन लगाने के बाद क्या हुआ, तेल की कीमत बढ़ गई, सारे एसेंशियल कमोडिटीज की कीमत बढ़ गई। किसके ऊपर असर आया? छोटे छोटे देश जिसका कोई लेना देना नहीं था रशिया यूक्रेन के साथ। आज भी जो मिडिल ईस्ट में हो रहा है, छोटे छोटे देशों का उनके पास कोई लेना देना नहीं है, लेकिन तेल का कीमत बढ़ेगा। यहीं पे सवाल आता है मल्टीलैटरल इंस्टीट्यूशंस की रिफॉर्म की। यूएन क्या कर रहा है, क्या कर रहा था? क्या यूएन ने कोशिश किया यूक्रेन रशिया लड़ाई को बिफोर इट द डिस्प्यूट टुक द शेप ऑफ अ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट? क्या उन्होंने कोशिश किया इसको रोकने की? क्या अभी भी कोशिश जारी है? हाँ, मतलब मीटिंग से कुछ नहीं होता। और मैं ये भी कहना चाहता हूं, प्राइम मिनिस्टर की बातों से जितना मुझे समझ में आता है कि एक G20 का कंसेंसस इंडिया का ऑब्जेक्टिव नहीं है। इंडिया चाहते हैं कि दुनिया भर में शांति आए और उसके लिए काम हो। दिस इज व्हाई प्राइम मिनिस्टर सेड दिस इज नॉट एन एरा ऑफ वॉर। आप में कोई प्रॉब्लम है उसको बातचीत से हल करें, लेकिन यहाँ एक माहौल है जहां पे लगता है, दुख की बात है, कुछ ऐसे संस्थाएं हैं जो चाहते हैं कि पीरियोडिकली लड़ाई चलती रहे ताकि उनकी इकोनॉमी में असर पॉजिटिव हो, मिलिट्री इंडस्ट्रियल कॉम्प्लेक्स को बिजनेस चलते रहे। ये कोई बात ही नहीं करता कि बिफोर अ डिस्प्यूट टेक्स द शेप ऑफ अ कॉन्फ्लिक्ट मैं उसको रोक दूं और वहीं पे सॉल्व करूं। दैट इज वेयर द रिफॉर्म ऑफ यूनाइटेड नेशन कम्स। और एक चीज है, हाँ, यूनाइटेड नेशन को चेंज करना G20 का काम नहीं है, लेकिन इस तरह से अगर यूएन काम करता रहे तो यूएन की रेलेवेंस धीरे धीरे कम हो रहा है। आज G20 का जो इतना रेलेवेंस है,
अगर राजीव जी यूएन का रिलेवेंस बढ़ रहा होता तो जो अलग अलग निकलकर ग्रुपिंग शुरू हो गई है, वो ग्रुपिंग शायद उसकी जरूरत नहीं पड़ती।
बिल्कुल बिल्कुल। देखिए, जो इनफॉर्मल ग्रुपिंग्स G20 जैसी है, वह एक बड़ा जो संस्था है जैसे यूनाइटेड नेशंस है, उसमें न कार्य करने की जो समस्या है उसी के समाधान हेतु की गई है, इसमें दो मत नहीं है। और इस तरह के जैसे सॉफ्ट लॉ जिसे कहते हैं, और आपने कल सॉफ्ट पावर की बात की थी, अब सॉफ्ट लॉज हार्ड लॉज भी है। सॉफ्ट लॉ जैसे हो गए, गाइडलाइंस हो गए, नोटिसेज हो गए, एडमिनिस्ट्रेटिव लॉज टाइप हो गए। तो इस तरह की जो चीज़ें आती है ये नॉन बाइंडिंग होती है कि भाई ठीक है, आपके ऊपर ज़बरदस्ती नहीं इसको लागू किया जाएगा। ऐसे अंतर्राष्ट्रीय कानून के अंदर कोई भी कानून भी बाध्य नहीं है, और कि आप माने तो ठीक है, नहीं माने तो कोई बात नहीं। आप पर ज़बरदस्ती आप अंतर्राष्ट्रीय समुदाय के सदस्य तो नहीं माना जाता है। लेकिन विशेष करके ऐसे नॉन बाइंडिंग जो रहते हैं मसले, गाइडलाइंस रहते हैं, उससे होती है सुविधा। एक वॉलंटरी जिसको कहते हैं, स्वयं सेवी जिसे हम कहते हैं, स्वयंभूत होकर हम अपने आप से स्वीकार करते हैं कि ये हमारे कार्यशैली को सुधारने में मदद करेगी। एक सिद्धांत आप मान लेते हैं, एक विचार को मान लेते हैं, एक समझौते को मान लेते हैं, लेकिन उसकी जो प्रैक्टिकल प्रॉब्लम होती है उसको कैसे समाधान किया जाए। तो G20 का अगर आप एजेंडा उठाएंगे और बाकी संगठनों का उठाएंगे अगर आप एजेंडा, और ऐसी तरह की बैठकों का, तो आपको बहुत ब्रॉड जिसको कहते हैं ना, उसमें बहुत अंतर नजर नहीं आएगा। आप ब्रिक्स का उठाकर देख लें, चाहे आप SCO का उठाकर देख लें, आप बहुत सारे संगठन ऐसे हैं उसका उठा, आप यूनाइटेड नेशंस के रिजोल्यूशंस उठाकर देख लें, इसमें थोड़ा बहुत आपको प्रैक्टिकल एक दो इश्यूज नजर इधर आएंगे, लेकिन ब्रॉड प्रिंसिपल सबका वही रहता है कि सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट गोल होना चाहिए, डिजिटलाइजेशन होना चाहिए। अब हर एक मंच जो होता है इसको प्रयास करता है कि इसको कैसे इसको क्रियान्वित किया जाए।
But I think what made India's G20 presidency unique in that aspect is that despite that crisis that was looming over the world affairs, despite the developing economies, they of course are vulnerable, but as Mr. Pine said, they were the ones being impacted despite being no fault of theirs. The fact that India then provided, amid this disruptive atmosphere that prevailed globally, India provided an alternate solution that we need to grow sustainably. We need to have a world where there is no terrorism. And in fact, yesterday also the Prime Minister highlighted how terrorism in any form, for any reason, cannot be justified. That of course drew a lot of criticism because in a way it was seen as support to Israel. But the fact is, as a country that has borne the brunt of terrorism for several decades, this statement and the fact, the irony that the world even today does not have a uniform even definition of terrorism, that speaks about how serious the world is about battling terrorism. So India's effort was to mainstream all of these issues which impact the world globally, but nobody is willing to talk about it. All of these sessions, Ambassador Sajjanhar, that India discussed at G20, ultimately at P20 also, there were 4 thematic sessions, and all of these curated so well, which are intertwined, which are interconnected, and which talk about development of the world together. The world is one family. So a huge significance there amid the global crisis that prevails.
No, you're very right, Tina, because, when we speak about this, the whole world is, of course, interdependent. It is networked, it is interlinked, and all these issues that we are talking about, they are also networked and interlinked. Just to give you an example, we've been speaking about the women-led development, and we know that if we are, to talk about the sustainable development, then women constitute about 50% of the global workforce. And if they are not included, with full dignity, with full respect, with full rights and safety and security, if they are not included in the workforce globally, then of course we'll not be able to achieve the objectives that we have set ourselves to achieve. So all of them, whether we are talking about climate change, as you have been discussing, and your panelists have also been sharing their own thoughts and views on it, that is very important. Climate change is very important for any type of sustainable development. And in that context, I think this 3-day conference of the speakers, of the heads of the parliaments of different countries, I think it has brought all these issues on the same platform. It has, I'm really happy that this meeting of the speakers has taken place, because going into the summit meeting last month, Of course, we were talking about the reform of multilateral institutions. We were talking about the reform of the multilateral development banks, because the developing countries particularly were suffering from huge rising piles of debt, also galloping inflation. And all these things could be done by reform of the multilateral institutions, the MDBs, etc. So I'm happy that this meeting has taken place after 1 month of the summit, so that the different countries and at the level of the people-led institutions, the parliaments, they can also discuss these issues, they can debate on these issues and see how they can be taken forward through the parliaments, because of course, the executive action is very important, it's very relevant, it's very significant. But the success of all these initiatives, Tina, will really depend when we are able to translate them and bring them as far as, for implementation by people are concerned. And, even let's say the initiative that Prime Minister Modi had given, which is lifestyle for environment at the COP26 in Glasgow. And that has now been enshrined in the New Delhi Leaders Declaration as the lifestyle for sustainable development. So all these aspects cannot be implemented unless communities, unless individuals, unless societies embrace them and agree to take them forward. And I think this is a huge success of the P20 consensus declaration that has come. And if I may also just add, at the end of it, we are going to see a virtual summit of all the G20 leaders taking place in November next month. And I think that will be a very important element because we'll be able to, that will be useful for stock taking. This will be useful for finding out how much progress has been achieved and, trying to carve out the way forward as we go along on all these issues.
You're right, Ambassador.
Whether it is reform
setting
of
a pro-people agenda, getting consensus on all of these India's priorities and approaches through G20 and through P20 has been the first big success. Now the key will lie in its implementation, and that's where the parliaments, the legislative procedures in different countries will begin. Mr. Pine, how successful do you see that happening? Especially because Mr. Sajjanhar spoke about the pro-people approach of India. It brings me to the thematic session that took place this morning on DPI. It's commendable that for the first time, at least a working definition of DPI has been recognized by a multilateral forum such as the P20. But now the next step is on how to deploy, how to implement it, to take it to a level of a global DPI framework.
I think the best thing what India has done is that when it talks about DPI, it has already demonstrated what can be achieved by a country, a developing country or a rapidly developing country like India, which probably 30 years back was on the verge of bankruptcy, and what can be used as a template by developing countries. Like, for example, India is saying that, look, don't expect all the solutions to come from the West. For example, if a country talks about giving the best to its own beneficiaries for social development programs, I think if you look at the JAM Trinity, Jan Dhan Aadhaar Mobile, the direct benefit transfer, how you bypass all the middlemen and directly reach to your beneficiaries, to the poorest, to what is called the last man, Antodaya. This is the greatest example. How you can use a COVID app in terms of making sure that everybody gets vaccinated. I think that's a great example. And these are all open source architecture, which means India is saying, you please use it. How you can use a Mudra scheme to create 8 crore new entrepreneurs. How you can empower women, because 70% of the loan under the Mudra scheme went to women. How you can use the self-help group concept to empower women. There are more than 6.8 crore women in this country who are engaged with the self-help groups and have become self-sufficient, self-employed. How you can use concepts like Stand Up India or PM Vishwakarma to create, instead of forcing or asking people to look for jobs, you're creating livelihood for them by empowering them to sell their own skill sets and in a much better manner. So this is a template for the rest of the world to emulate, that you can while giving free vaccines, while giving free ration to 80 crore plus people for the last 3 years, you can still have economic reforms and you can still become the 5th largest economy of the world. So the development model has to move from GDP centric towards to human centric. And this is the template which is already there for India for the rest of the world to emulate. I think this is what India has done. Probably, I'm not blaming anybody, but the Western countries could not do it for one simple reason. Because India went through these challenges that the developing countries are going through to the smaller countries. 30 years back, remember, we were on the verge of bankruptcy. And then today you have a foreign exchange reserve of $600 billion. So our approach is more practical and implementable by the global south. That's why we have become the voice of the global south.
So Dr. Nayan, with these oases of ideas and the kind of initiatives we've taken, with the kind of transformation we've brought about, does this mean, of course, we are seeing a lot of developing countries looking at India as the beacon of hope, but does it mark India's diplomacy on the global stage? Do you see that happen?
Of course, this is taking off, no doubt about it. And India has provided leadership in this G20 summit or now P20 meetings, whatever you call it. And we tried to, as he has rightly pointed out, to showcase our achievements. And the very basic objective of such a forum or G20 kinds of, say, bodies is to share experiences. Like I have certain experiences and which could deliver good for my people. So could you also try it? So this is what is important. And in fact, India is not saying that I am the best. We have got certain things, we experimented, and we have got a very humble approach. We say Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. We all are one. And just see my experience, my knowledge, my heritage, and everything is for mankind. Even science and technology, whether it is a space program or any other program, is for mankind. And we started, except Pakistan, we have offered all the technological help to our neighborhood. So this is how we are progressing, whether it is SNT, whether it is vaccine, he has rightly pointed out.
But just to add, in times of crisis, we've helped even the adversary countries.
Yes, absolutely.
No, of course, like I will not say we'll be an adversary country. We try to resolve it. It is not, we have never been an aggressor country. So we tried, we do our best. But if war is imposed on us, then we have got no option. We'll have to go for that. Because it should not be considered our weakness. Yeah. That if it is you impose on us, we will respond in a proper way, befitting way. So this is what we have been doing, and for that we have been preparing. It is not that we are so naive and novice that we will be just sitting quietly and someone should come and attack and will be at the mercy of an aggressor country. There should be deterrence. That if you try to do any mess up, you will get consequences. So this message or this signaling should also go. But we are ready to work together. We are ready to work together for the common good. We are ready to work together for global goods. We are ready to work together for humankind, mankind, and for the prosperity of everyone. So this has been our philosophy.
In 2016, India launched a satellite called SCATSAT. Its objective is to predict cyclones. Now in 1990s, when cyclones used to happen in India, हर साल जब cyclone आता था, ओडिशा जैसे तटवर्ती स्टेट में 10,000 12,000 लोग मर जाते थे. आज you don't have a single casualty, or maybe the casualties are less than 20. And why? Because our space program. This is how India's technology has helped in, saving lives and empowering lives.
बिल्कुल. इसी में हम जब वो डिजिटल पावर की भी बात है और प्रधानमंत्री ने भी उसको बहुत ही शिद्दत से लिया, 1 जुलाई 2015 को उन्होंने डिजिटल इंडिया मिशन भी शुरू किया. मैं अगर थोड़ा आंकड़ा इधर उधर कुछ छान रहा था तो देखा कि भाई 40 साल बीते, जो 40 साल थे उसमें हम एनालॉग से डिजिटल तक आए. लेकिन अगर हम डिजिटल की पावर की बात करें तो देखने में ये आता है कि रेडियो को 6 करोड़ लोगों तक पहुंचने में 30 साल लगा, टीवी को 6 करोड़ लोगों तक पहुंचने में 15 साल लगा, और इंटरनेट को 6 करोड़ लोगों तक पहुंचने में मात्र 3 साल लगा. कितनी बड़ी पावर है.
बहुत बड़ी पावर है. मैं एक चीज कहना चाहता हूं कि एक परसेप्शन है कि फॉर्मल एजुकेशन के सिवा कोई टेक्नोलॉजी यूज नहीं कर सकता. इंडिया ने ये परसेप्शन तोड़ दिया है, क्योंकि जब ये डिजिटल इंडिया की एक मुहिम चलाई जा रही थी, बहुत लोग हंस रहे थे कि कैसे इंडिया में कोई यूज करेगा. 2022 में इंडिया में डिजिटल ट्रांजैक्शंस थ्रू यूपीआई was $1.5 trillion. वो US, UK, फ्रांस, जर्मनी से ज्यादा था उन सारे देश को मिला के। आज आप देखिए हर किसी के पास जो यूपीआई है, मतलब गरीब से अमीर हर एक कोई एक प्लेटफॉर्म में। दैट इज द काइंड ऑफ एम्पावरमेंट दैट हैज बीन डन विद द यूज ऑफ टेक्नोलॉजी। आपने क्या किया, आपने सबके हाथ में मोबाइल दे दिए, आपने ब्रॉडबैंड का प्राइस कम कर दिया, फिर यू इंट्रोड्यूस यूपीआई एंड यू हैव क्रिएटेड मोस्टली अ कैशलेस इकोनॉमी एंड एवरीथिंग इज नाउ you know what is happening and it has empowered the poorest man. आज उसको भी पता है कि I can get paid, मतलब ऑन अ लाइटर नोट
रिक्शा पुलर ने कल मेरे से 20 रुपया डिजिटल फोन पे से मांगा।
अच्छा, so I just want to say, एक दिन तो कोई एक भिखारी भी मुझे बोला कि यूपीआई है, आप ले लीजिए।
Actually, we were discussing this yesterday, that this is the kind of change we've seen, which has been hailed by international leaders also, that the transformation you would otherwise expect decades to take place, it has happened in 2-3 years. Ambassador, that is where the concept of data for development, the thrust that India has been putting on, comes in. And how has that resonated among countries of the global south, of which India has become a major voice today?
No, absolutely. I think this is one of the biggest achievements. One can say there are huge achievements that India has, it has been able to deliver over the last few years. But as far as the digital public infrastructure is concerned, as far as reaching out, creating identities of all people, and initially, exactly as your panelist just now was saying, that people were very dismissive of this idea that it will not be able to work. Number one, how will you provide cell phones to everyone? How will there be sort of, connectivity between everyone? How will they be able to manage this? And even sort of, small time traders, how will they be able to have access to this technology? But I think we have been able to demonstrate that where there is a will, it is possible. In terms of getting financial inclusion, for instance, getting 500 million accounts opened. Earlier, it used to be said that when some funds or support or subsidy or assistance from the government was required to go to the people, then 85% of that used to disappear amongst the middlemen who were handling the transfer of these resources. Today, at the click of a button, we can get the 100% of the funds deposited in the account. So, it is quick, it is efficient, it is seamless, it is, corruption-free, it is all the money is going. So I think that is such a huge achievement that India has been able to register. And I think also, Tina, the other aspect in this, which is very important, is that, not only India, but the whole world has been going through very difficult times, through turbulent times over the last 3-4 years. First, we had the pandemic from early 2020, and meaning we are still experiencing the impact and the after effects of that. Then we've had the other black swan event of the Russia-Ukraine conflict. I don't think anyone really expected that this would happen at this scale, and it would continue for more than 18-19 months. But it has been happening, and the impact that it has had the worldwide has been devastating, has been debilitating, both politically as well as in terms of the economies of these countries. I think as far as India, what we have been able to do and achieve is that while dealing with the impact of these crises, the world over crises, we have continued our economic reform program. Whether it is putting in place GST, whether it is putting in place, the productivity-linked incentive scheme, it is putting in place the insolvency and bankruptcy code, taking them forward, the Ujjwala Yojana, the Arogya Yojana, all these different initiatives, we have continued to take them and implement them. So that has been extremely successful, and in all that, I think the fundamental basis, foundation has been provided by this public digital infrastructure. And India, in its magnanimity and generosity, has offered this as a common good as a global good to other countries, particularly to developing countries. Of course, this is not very much appreciated by the big tech giants because they are not used to giving these facilities and these benefits free of charge to the people, and they would like that these platforms, this space, should also be used to garner profits for them. But India has, whether it was our CoWIN or it is our UPI, all these platforms, we have offered it to anyone who is keen, and I can see that there is a whole lot of interest from a large number of countries, particularly from developing countries. And I think it's in that context that India has been able to demonstrate that when it grows, when its economy grows, when it develops, then it is not only for its own benefit, but it is for the benefit, it's for the common good of all people.
You're
and
right,
when
Ambassador.
India,
all of these changes that you just mentioned, these have happened in India in the wake of the two black swan events, the COVID pandemic, the Russia-Ukraine crisis. And India, through its foreign policy, broke that belief that in times of crisis, foreign policies need to be nationalistic, your policies need to be protectionist, because despite us battling the second wave of COVID pandemic, which was unprecedented, we did help out a lot of the other countries. Mr. Pine, do you think all of that diplomatic effort that we put in during the COVID pandemic and during the supply chain crisis as well, has today helped India garner the kind of support that it has seen?
Oh, absolutely. First and foremost, as Ambassador also rightly mentioned, the series of reforms that India was bringing in, including Atmanirbhar Bharat, including production-linked incentive during the peak of the COVID situation. Then we completely churned out, we made sure that to leverage our entire industrial scale production mechanism or system in place to produce vaccines, not just for India, but we gave it to almost 100 odd other countries. 150 other countries in totality got vaccines, medicines and medical equipment from India. So we went ahead, unfortunately, when multilateral institutions were not coming in to help. Right. There was nobody to help Sri Lanka. There was nobody who went ahead to help Turkey. We were the first as a country which sent its highly specialized disaster response force to help out Turkey. Unfortunately, some countries that time were too busy to fund the Ukraine war than to help the people of Turkey who were actually dying. We don't have a diplomatic relation with Afghanistan, but we went ahead and gave wheat to them. So there are many such examples. The reason why, the president of Papua New Guinea touched the feet of Prime Minister Modi. Why is it so? Because the kind of help that India gave, not for getting any, cheap popularity, but India genuinely felt that it is important that I share it. And that is part of our Indian ethos. That is the reason that these countries today consider India as the voice of the voiceless. There was a summit which happened in 2023 January, Global South Summit, in which 120 developing countries participated. And they actually declared India as their voice. So let me tell you, no one took the initiative before Prime Minister Modi anywhere in the world to, recognize and give African Union the legitimate space in global forum that it deserves. Unfortunately, the Western countries, they have, there's no colonialism today, but neo-colonialism still exists. Absolutely. They are exploited. I mean, have you ever seen the cobalt that is so very important in making of semiconductors? Have you ever seen any laptop made in any of the African countries, whereas all the minerals come from there? 80% of the uranium from Niger goes to a European country, with which they create clean energy in their own country, but 80% people of Niger don't have access to electricity. Today, African Union sitting in the same table where European Union representatives are sitting. I think that's a remarkable achievement, remarkable step taken none other than Prime Minister Modi. And this is where equality comes in. Unfortunately, India has done a lot of things which the multilateral institutions should have done. I think UN should have been the first country to go to Turkey. I think UN should have been the first country to go to Sri Lanka. No blaming, but India demonstrated what, if the willingness is there, what can be done, even as you are taking care of 140 crore of your own people.
That's a very valid valid point, Dr. Nayan. The fact that every big power today has a stake in Africa, but nobody wanted to give them a voice. India was the first country that came up with this initiative, the Voice of Global South, 125 countries participating, and then ensuring that African Union gets its due representation in the G20, which is one of the important multilateral fora. How big a difference will the representation of AU now make to this important event, important forum, and especially in terms of economic cooperation, because that's the platform that it is made for?
I completely agree with you. I completely agree with him also. I'll just add to it. He talked about uranium, the use of uranium. Recently, you may have watched the movie Oppenheimer, but the movie did not show that the first bomb of United States was made from the African uranium. Ghana supplied it. So this is the reality, no doubt about it. So we should not just blame the developed countries, so-called developed countries or Western countries. Even China has exploited them.
Absolutely.
And we sometimes, what happens in raising the slogan of Global South, we tend to overlook or ignore Chinese role. And what China is doing now, of course, the Western countries have been exploiting so-called neo-colonialism, neo-imperialism, this philosophy is there. Their philosophy is innate in their economic model. So there is no denial about it. So the country which is embracing, or the country which is swearing by, or which has got the precept of equality, socialism, communism, and that country is also exploiting. That is quite worrisome. And this fact, India snatched the leadership of Global South from China. China was trying to dilly-dallying. It was trying to sabotage the summit last month. But India took a very bold step and convinced the world. It had to convince. Once you are getting any country inducted in the so-called G20, then it is becoming G21 now. G20 has become G21. 55 countries which are rich in minerals, which are rich in human resources, but it's conflict prone, conflict ridden, whatever you like to call it. So now you have to integrate this section with the global system. You have to mainstream this backward, you can say, quote unquote, or undeveloped zone of the world to the stability of the world. And that's why you will find that Prime Minister raised the issue of peace, terrorism. All these issues are also significant. Initially, when it was the precursor, you can say, predecessor of summit process, but the G20 forum was very much there, of foreign finance ministers and governors of central banks. At that time, it was slightly, they tried to see the forum in an insulated form, just financial body. But soon they realized that if you don't address global challenges, global problems, poverty, debt, inflation, empowerment of women, and digitalization, bridging general divides existing in the world, you cannot have financial stability even if you have got financial stability board. So board will be, basically will be rendered helpless. So this is how the vision of India to integrate this great part, big part into the system is quite significant, and we are going to see its results. And now the philosophy which India has given, and that is, as we have been talking about, that in United Nations also passes all kinds of resolution, but a practical implementable document is going to come about. And the way we are progressing, just see what Prime Minister did. Now we have got P20. After G20, we have got P20. And soon it will be follow-up meeting digital, which Ambassador Sajjan has rightly pointed out. Now there will be follow-up meeting. So stock taking will be done in such meetings, and then you will assess the level of implementation of what you have just announced. Declaration is very fine, you can announce anything, but how it is progressing, the roadmap, what are the hindrances, what are the roadblocks. Road is there, roadmap is there, but roadblocks are also to be taken into account. And what new solution you can provide. So this is the challenge which we are seeing it a very, very different perspective. Problem solution oriented perspective, problem gauging perspective, and again assessment process. Like this is how we are moving on this system. Yeah.
Right. Who would have thought, Ramveer, that last year when India took over the presidency of G20, it's an